future is now.
Hi everyone, Cheryl, Cran, and this week I wanted to talk about why the heck is forced change so hard? I mean, most of us have gotten quite adept and adaptable to change. I mean, let's face it, we've been dealing with change for our own personal realities for decades now. I mean, technology, innovation, change, the speed of societal change, the speed of worker attitude change has all been very real. But once the coronavirus pandemic hit us globally, it's like this is a forced change. We're being guided on what to do as far as social distancing. We're being guided what to do as far as face masks. We're being guided what to do as far as business coming back. And, usually there's two responses to forced change. And one of them is like push back. We get restless and people just go, no, I'm going to do my own thing. It's almost like revolting or going back against, rebelling against the controlled or the perceived control factor that's being exerted on us. And then the other response is to watch and navigate and realize the impact of our individual behavior on the collective. And I think, from what I've observed, the majority of people have observed from that personal individual place of individual behavior and how that impacts the collective. And so when we look at forced change, what we're wanting to do is to approach it from a change leadership mindset. And the change leadership mindset means that we look to agility of mind. We look to noticing when we're pushing back against reality or when we're pushing up against things that we don't want to believe, or we go into denial or avoidance, or we might just, some people are kind of like, well, I'll just wait this out and see it all go back to normal. And others are looking at their businesses and pivoting. A great example of that in my neighborhood is there's a fabric and pattern making shop just down the street next to one of my favorite pizza places, and they do pattern making and such. And as soon as the coronavirus pandemic hit, they started making face masks and making those available. So that's an example of a pivot. That's a sort of a natural innovation off the industry that they're already in. Other companies like Vistaprint online is turned to making masks of a variety of prints and such. So making opportunity of the current reality is one way to deal with it. But depending on your industry or your business, we're each going to individually have our own unique responses to the forced change. If you're in an industry where the forced change is causing a holding pattern, such as the meetings industry, where this is a multi-billion-dollar industry where it's based on people gathering and meeting, and now globally we're being told, meetings of 50 people or more is not recommended until they find a vaccine or medicine that will tackle the virus. That's putting a shift or a focus of a shift on the future of the meetings industry. And I actually predict that we're going to see meetings face-to-face because we as humans, that's our nature, is to gather. And if many of you who've been around for a long time will remember, in 2008, we had about a 6-month dip of no meetings. Obviously not a pandemic, but it was a crisis nonetheless. And about 6 months for it to recover and for people to begin trusting to meet again. In this case, obviously going to be a longer time frame. And we're going to see a whole bunch of things shift, like face masks and social distancing. We're certainly not going to see the crowded in meeting spaces that we've seen before. And I actually predict what we'll see is large meetings, but separated more into hybrid models. So live streaming is going to become even more ubiquitous than it already is. In those conferences where there's thousands and thousands of people, more smaller meetings versus one large room with a bunch of people jam-packed in it. I see a lot of potential change for the industry. And of course, almost every keynote speaker is providing their services as virtual keynotes as well. But what's interesting phenomena as a result of all these forced changes is, of course, people are getting technology fatigue. I just was on a conference call today with a client, and they were talking about how they actually were relieved to be doing a conference call versus a Zoom call because they felt less pressure and they felt that it was less energy to do that. And so it's fascinating how, although we are all relying on the virtual technology, as humans, there's an energetic toll that it takes. So what can we do to deal with forced change? Well, I would love to say to you, it means we have to innovate. It means we have to pivot. It means we have to change. And all that's true. But really on a deeper level, it's causing us as leaders to have that introspection of what really matters. I think what it's forcing is prioritization. What's really important? I know for me, if I look at our business, at our consulting and coaching and our online courses and the keynote speeches, it's just looking at how do we continue to add value for our clients. And that hasn't changed. What has changed is the delivery mechanisms and how we make that value available. And I think that's the opportunity for all of us, regardless of our business, is how are we adding value to our clients or to our communities as a whole or to the collective. The thing to recognize about forced change is it's really causing us, if you feel it in your body, it causes you to kind of almost do like that pushback that I mentioned earlier. And what we want to get really good at is feeling the change, noticing our response, and then being open to choosing alternate behaviors and choices. So, for example, an example of a forced change can really cause us to hold tighter to our identity, right? So if our identity is deeply entrenched in one element of how we show up in the world, then we are going to feel threatened. But if we've done our inner work and realized that we are more than a single identity and that we have multiple ways that we interact with people and interact with our services and can add value, there's sort of almost like a freedom that comes with that. And one exercise that I would encourage you to do is to write down the multiple layers of your identity. So how do you communicate your identity? Is it as a mother, a father, a sister, a brother, a husband, a wife, a consultant, a coach, a keynote speaker, a CEO? Whatever your identity is, because that's what we're always striving to protect is identity. And so it's important to look at forced change as an opportunity to be more malleable with our self-identity. And so an exercise is to sit down and look at your multiple identities. It's also an opportunity to ask yourself, pre-pandemic, were you really enjoying what you were doing? Were you really engaged with it? Were you really loving it? Or had you begun to resent it or resist it or not be as engaged with it? Had you lost focus with the adding value aspect of what you do? So as I said, this forced change is causing deep introspection. And my request of you this week would be to really use this opportunity to go deeper in your introspection. This is the perfect time. Every time we've gone through any kind of crisis is when I always work with a coach, but I've always amped up working with a coach when we go through times like this, because even though we think we have the ability to navigate ourselves out through, it's really helpful to have those outside perspectives and those strategic insights and those multiple insights that can help us go beyond our current reality. And I think one of the things that's most difficult with forced change is we tend to get rooted into not only the identity stuckness that many of us can get into, but just the way we perceive our problems and our challenges. We can often see them as unmovable and unfixable. And often working with others and getting other perspectives can shift that big time. So yeah, what do we do with forced change? We have to ramp up our ability to be change leaders. I wrote the book, The Art of Change Leadership, in 2015. I talk about the WOW model. What's our opportunity? What's next? And what's working? And if we look at forced change through that lens and we start to work through what's the opportunity, what's working, what's next, we can start to move towards creating that future. And really being present with realizing what we're pushing up against. Are we pushing up against something that's never going to change? Are we trying to avoid reality? Or are we working with reality and trying to add value the best way we can and show up for the people that we're here to serve? I hope that's of some help. Enjoy the rest of your week and take care.